Good evening, and thank you very much for coming to Toronto Police Headquarters. Today, I'd like to introduce to you Chief Mark Saunders, Mayor John Tory, Chair of the Toronto Police Services Board, Andy Pringle, and the co-chairs of the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel, who will be speaking to us about the Toronto Police Services Board race-based data collection policy. Following the questions for the new policy, the Mayor will be available for city-related questions.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. At our meeting today, the Toronto Police Services Board unanimously approved a new race-based data collection, analysis, and public reporting policy. This policy confirms the board's ongoing commitment to the elimination of racial bias and the promotion of equity, fairness, and non-discriminatory police service delivery in Toronto. This policy is a critical step forward for the board and for the service, the first such comprehensive policy in law enforcement in Ontario and across Canada. We, along with the board, are very proud of this policy and what it represents for communities across Toronto. We are grateful to everyone, members of the public, members of the service, and members of our Anti-Racism Advisory Panel who engaged with us and informed this important policy development process. By bringing community voices into the policy development process, we recognize that transparency and accountability are critical in building community trust and engagement between the Toronto Police Service and the communities that we serve. At this time, I would like to introduce Mayor John Tory, who will also say a few words about the policy.
Upala, thank you, and good afternoon. And I want to begin myself by thanking the co-chairs of this advisory panel, Natisha Masakwai and Upala Chandrasekhara, for their work, because this is a landmark policy. This is something that is a huge step forward for our police service, and as you heard, it is the kind of thing that we expect from our police service, which is to show national leadership. It has taken courage and sensitivity and persistence to take what has been over time a very controversial issue and find a way to bring together all the different people that they consulted during the course of their work, including the men and women of the Toronto Police Service itself, and to fashion a policy that is going to provide for greater transparency, greater accountability, greater respect, and I think that in turn is going to help us with one of our most important tasks, if not our most important task, which is building up trust in the police. This is the right thing to do, and I believe that they and we have gone about it the right way, and I want to extend a profound thanks to them and as well to the chair of our Police Services Board, Andy Pringle, because this is something that he has treated throughout the whole question of building up trust and making sure that some of those communities where trust had been eroded was a priority and continued to be a priority and has shepherded this work all the way through. I believe that as you learn more about this policy and as the people of Toronto learn more about this policy, they will see it as sensible, which it is, and they will understand, because many of them were involved, the degree of extensive consultation that led to this policy. And what you will see now is the collection of information, the analysis of that information, very importantly by an independent civilian body, and then identification coming out of that analysis of problems that may or may not exist. We have listened to the calls for the collection of race-based data, and it is something that is going to increase transparency, it is something that is going to increase accountability, and it is something that is going to lead to more respect and more trust. It is, we understand very clearly as a result of this entire exercise and a lot of the discussion that's gone on over years past, that if we don't collect this data, then you can't analyze it. And if you can't analyze it, then you're not going to know for sure whether problems that people talk about a lot in our community actually exist. This will give us objective data, objectively analyzed, that is going to help us to address problems. And I think people in Toronto, no matter what they do, understand the importance of good data in making important decisions and making good public policy. And when it comes to shining a light on the challenges which require addressing in the cause of respect for and trust in the police, nothing is more important in the life of our city. I want to assure people today that the police board, I as mayor and as a member of the police board, and I'm sure the board itself, is prepared to act on what comes out of this analysis and what comes out of this data. That's why we're collecting it, so that it can be analyzed by us, but also independently by objective third parties, and then it presents us with opportunities to take action. This represents a huge step forward in the building up of trust in policing and the elimination of any bias that may be identified. And that, in the most diverse city in the world, is something that is fundamentally important. And I'm proud of the fact that this board, this committee, this police service, with the support of the chief, is showing leadership nationally in doing something that is going to be a good thing for the city and for its police service and for policing in general. Thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to ask Chief Saunders himself to come up and say a few words about this new policy.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, Chair Pringle and the board for having us reach where we are today. And a special thanks to Upala and Nautisha for all of the hard work and labor that it took to get here. So at the end of the day, when we get this right, what we'll be able to do with the strategy is to identify and to monitor and eliminate potential systemic racism. One of the messages that I heard at the board meeting over and over again was the concern that this is just going to be another report out of many reports that have taken place some 40 years. And I'm here to say that it is not. It is a call for action. When we talk about our next steps now, over the next couple of weeks, I'll be working with the community. I'll be working with our officers to make sure that we do get this right and that we do move forward. And if we do it right, then what will happen is we'll be able to tell the true, fulsome story. And I think that's what's critical, and I think that's key. And the other factor is it is not just law enforcement. This Anti-Racism Act speaks to education. It speaks to child welfare. And we have over 4,000 police agencies right now that are measuring this data. But I think that this one will be a best in class because with the cooperative, if the government and cooperative with the communities that have taken part, the multitude of reports, the multitude of agencies, we're looking forward to seeing what we can do in order to get this right. If we're talking about modernization, if we're talking about inclusiveness and community-centric, this is definitely a necessary tool that will get us in that right direction. So having said that, Nautisha, I believe, or no, we take questions right now. Is that correct? And you know what? Upala and Nautisha, can you come on up, just in case? So with respect to this subject matter, does anyone have any questions? Please come up.
Chief Saunders and to the co-chairs, just wondering if you can define what an interaction is for people at home.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So with regards to this policy at full implementation will cover all significant interactions between the police service and members of the public. So things like use of force incidents, stops, searches, all those kinds of interactions. What this policy allows is a phased-in implementations beginning with use of force. And there are several reasons why we chose there. First of all, we didn't want to start with one particular part in the city, for example, one police division, because there is a risk of stigmatizing one community because, you know, why did you choose one police division over the other? We also wanted to ensure that there's provincial alignment between this policy and what's happening in the province. So anytime a police officer engages in the use of force, a mandatory form has to be completed. And that form is a provincially mandated form. And under the Anti-Racism Act, that form will also collect race-based data within the next year. And so we wanted to ensure that we begin with an interaction where there's lots of monitoring and oversight and there's provincial alignment.
The mayor, you know, called this a landmark a decision that's just been made. Can you speak to the path that it's taken to get here? If it's been at all disheartening and everything that has led up to this point of making this move towards race-based collection, what are the types of feelings that are kind of associated with what has taken to get here?
I think it's extremely important to understand the number of years community specifically, and specifically Black community, have spent asking and demanding for the collection of race-based data. It's our understanding that the ability to quantify our experiences, right, the qualitative experiences that we continually talk about, need to be justified in a very measurable manner. So when we talk about 30 years or the path to get here over a 30-year period, it's acknowledging all of that activism from community, but as well from institutions, the reports that we've looked at, and we can list the whole host of reports that have all asked for the collection of race-based data. If we go to more recent times, our panel was struck because of a recommendation from the local inquest, which clearly states the collection of race-based data is good practice. We can also look to the Ontario Human Rights Commission's report that just came out in terms of looking at race-based data collection as well as one of their recommendations. And then the TELUC report is also another more recent report that all ask for the same thing. So I think today what you're seeing is the service listening, absolutely listening, and reflecting historically on what the community has been asking for. And the process that we engaged in is one of extreme collaboration with community, that every step of this process was influenced by community, led by community members such as myself, to ensure that those voices would not be lost throughout this process.
And I can speak on behalf of the men and women of the Toronto Police Service. We embrace this, and I say that because collectively 99.9% of the men and women sworn in civilian meet the challenges that are in front of them every day. They do a fantastic job. They do things with respect and in accordance to law. And this is an opportunity to look at the systemic procedures and policies that are in place right now. They may be well-intended, but may have a negative impact and not serve the necessary purposes. And so that will give us that opportunity. And when we take this pilot and look at the numbers, we will have the scope to measure. So we'll be dealing with use of force. We'll also be dealing with level 3 strip searches as well, too. That will give us the opportunity to have the conversations with the community and with the officers to figure out what we need to get it right so that we can broaden from there. So there really is a cooperative level of relationships building from all across in order to make sure that we get this right. And I really do think at the end of the day we'll be able to tell the complete story, which I think is what the end goal is, so that we can get this right collectively and have the right steps to move things forward, enhancing relationships, not just with law enforcement, but as I said, with education, with child welfare, and learning some of the best practices that are going on all over the world as we speak right now.
So we spoke about community advisory committee to make sure that the data is misinterpreted. Can you expand upon that? Just what safeguards will be in place so that it doesn't get misconstrued or misinterpreted?
So one of the questions that was raised during the board meeting was about, okay, this information for the first time ever will be available publicly through the Toronto Police Service Public Safety Data Portal. And so with that, you know, all hosts of individuals will be able to analyze this data, academics, community members, civilians, what have you. There's also a danger that this data might be misinterpreted and used for ill-intended purposes. And so what are the safeguards for that? We thought about that extensively in the policy, and what we have done is allowed for a community advisory committee to help contextualize some of the information. And we've been very clear that that community advisory committee needs to consist of racialized communities the most affected by anti-racism and issues of racial discrimination. So the African Caribbean Black community, Indigenous communities. And so with that group of individuals, our hope is that that community advisory group will help set the context for how to best interpret this data.
Chief Saunders, one of the concerns expressed earlier today was the data that will be tracked. And so you had some groups saying that the policy doesn't desegregate between individual officers. And so the notion with those who are behind or who've helped develop this policy was that that would be up to you. What's your response to that?
Well, the response really is that not a whole lot has changed. I'm responsible for the conduct of all members of the Toronto Police Service, and I'll continue to do that. And if we do see elements of misconduct, whether it requires a training element or whether it requires a discipline element, then we'll deal with that. But separate and distinct from that, this review speaks of systemic racism, and so that looks at the procedure policies that are in play right now and what can we do to learn as we measure, to figure out how we can grow to make sure that we get this right. So a discipline will always be discipline in all aspects, and I'll make sure that when that does come to surface, that we will take the appropriate action if necessary.
Chief, does that mean you're going to look at that kind of data, or just how would you know if there's a disciplinary issue?
We look at conduct every single day, and there are mechanisms from external agencies for the external complaints using the OIPRD or any other mechanisms. Internally, on a regular basis, our professional standards takes a serious look at the conduct of all of the members on a regular basis. We've got in-car cameras, we've got booking hall cameras, we're looking at body-worn cameras. These are all aspects that we have done for, A, the transparency piece to make sure that we get it right, so the objective evidence is there to assist in some of these interactions, which could be interpreted or misinterpreted. But B, it's to show that we believe that the vast majority of men and women are held to account, are doing a good job. But as an organization, we have to make sure that when those missteps occur, that we're there to act in an appropriate manner that is fair and tries to maintain public trust at all times.
So if you got a complaint about an officer's conduct, would you go look at that data for that officer?
Well, the data, I will look at the conduct complaint and what is that complaint, and then we will go through our regular course with respect to what we're doing. And then if it ties into the systemic issues, then definitely there would be some sort of bridge towards that. But again, an individual officer and conduct will remain the same as always. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah. I didn't hear anybody clamoring for me, so I should just leave.
I'll go comment.
Are there any questions you have for me that relate to this or anything else? Going once. Lucas.
On another issue, on Bill 5,
yes.
that came down today. I know that this is your release statement, but can you say what your reaction to that is, and how far the city is willing to go in reviewing that decision in terms of further challenges, et cetera?
Nothing has changed in terms of the wrong-headedness of the province deciding that one of the biggest governments in the country, democratically elected, is going to have its governance structure changed in the middle of an election campaign. We thought that was wrong then, and we still think it's wrong. And that's why the City Council authorized that the city itself should go all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, if necessary, to, if nothing else, get some reasoning, some of which we got today from the dissenting judges, that says this is wrong. This is not the way to go about trying to run a country showing adequate respect for the municipal level of government, which so many people count on. And so we'll await a report that will come to the City Council from the City Solicitor when it next meets. But the City's Council's instructions on going all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, or at least applying for leave to do the same, are on the record now. And I would expect that might well happen, that the leave application would be made, because I think it is very important to establish that, try to establish as much as best we can, that doing something as major as that in the middle of an election campaign without any consultation or collaboration whatsoever is just wrong. And that's how we felt then, and that's how we feel today.
Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, would you say that there are examples now going from 47 to 25 that have been detrimental? That there have been examples either through debate, either through motions, just since this decision has happened, where there has been a clear negative of having less seats?
I think the thing that is most noticed by the members of City Council is that they are representing twice as many people. And while there will be those who will say, well, that's the same number of citizens, about 110,000 that are represented by MPs and MPPs, I think most citizens understand that the dealings they have with their municipal government are more frequent in nature, are more granular in terms of the kinds of things that have to be attended to immediately. You need to have things attended to immediately if you have a sewage backup in your yard, or if you have a flood on your street, whereas some of the things that you might deal with on the other governments are not quite as urgent. And so I think that the one thing that we have noticed is that there's a tremendous workload increase on these councillors on things that are very, very important to people in their day-to-day lives. But that isn't really the point here. The point is that, that the court found today that the provincial government is within its constitutional jurisdiction to change the size of the City Council. Nobody really disputed that, although we tried to make an argument to see if it bore any fruit for us that they were not entitled to do this. It's the way they did it that we profoundly objected to, where it was done without any consultation. It was imposed on one of the biggest governments and responsibly elected governments in the country, and it was done in the middle of an election campaign. And surely that can't be right. And at least 2 of the judges out of 5 today recognized there were some major problems with that.
Will the city appeal?
Well, the City Council has given advance instructions, as it were, that the city legal staff should go all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, which is the next step from the case that was decided today. And we'll wait and have a report from the city solicitor, which I think is coming at the council meeting in early October. And then I presume we'll reinforce that decision, and all you can do is apply to be heard by the Supreme Court. They don't have to say yes. So that is the instruction previously given by the City Council, and I expect it would be maintained in place simply because I think we're looking, if for nothing else, for reasoning that comes from highly respected judges that says that provincial governments should not be trampling on municipal governments like this. It shows a disrespect and a disregard for what is one of the most important levels of government that people respect and are in contact with every day and that they democratically elect.
In your opinion, how is council working with 25 seats?
I think it's a work in progress. I think that, you know, I've said before, the meetings are shorter simply because you have fewer people speaking and asking questions. I think the collegiality is solid, but it always is in the first year. Things get a little less collegial sometimes as you get closer to an election, which is still 3 years away. So I think it's too early to judge, but I certainly think that the members of the council are very, you know, are finding it very, very constraining on them to both do their job as legislators at City Hall, but also to look after twice as many people as they did before, given the nature of municipal concerns people have, which are very granular and have to be dealt with usually quite immediately.
My apologies. I meant to ask the police chief also, in your opinion, how do you think the 11-week program, the gun violence program, has been working? Have you received any updates?
We received a kind of a preliminary update from the chief today in our meeting, and I will just say to you that he will report to the public at the appropriate time, because I think, you know, when you're introducing a program like this that started relatively recently and is relatively short, you want to make sure you report at the right time. But I will just say that my assessment was of what he said is that we're making some progress at gaining more intelligence, having more bail checks, having a greater presence of police in neighborhoods where there were problems, and if those were the objectives, which they were, I think that we're making some progress. But the level of shootings, even though it is only up a modest amount year over year, is still a matter of deep concern to the police and to me and to the members of City Council, and we're going to keep working with the police service and by investing in kids and families to make sure that it's diminished.
Mayor, on another topic, what's your reaction to the photos of Justin Trudeau?
Well, I know that you know, blackface is hurtful and causes pain to people, and I had to go through my own learning experience with this because I, as a commentator once, I've never dressed in that manner, but I did comment at one point in time trying to distinguish between why people might do this and why not, and that was a mistake. It's hurtful and it's unacceptable all the time. And I think that it is one of those kinds of things where I had to go through a learning experience on this, and I'm glad that I did. That's all I can say.
Any more questions?
Going once, going twice. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.